an ultimate global podcast. Hello, and welcome to our special weekly podcast on trending international and social affairs. You're listening to Saurabh Kora and George Mavros from Sydney.
So welcome everyone to another exciting episode of Ultimate Global Podcast in the series of episodes for CEOs, founders, and co-founders. Last time we were joined by Rasmus Host, the CEO of LMS 365. This time we are joined with Jane Oja. She's the Director of Growth at Fishburners. She has been working with Fishburners for the last 5.5 years, started off her journey way back in 2018 as Events Manager, Head of Growth, Director of Growth. And I thought that no better person than her to call on this topic for how the startup landscape has kind of changed in Australia over the years, because she interacts with a lot of founders, co-founders every now and then. And I guess she can be the best person to really interact about the new venture space in Australia at this point of time when everything is coming back to life after the pandemic. But before that, the first question for you, Jane, starting off with today's podcast, will be to understand a bit about your experience at Fishburners at the moment. So, would you like to describe for our audience what exactly are you doing at Fishburners at this point of time? And what is Fishburners for the audience which doesn't know that?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for having me firstly. But yeah, I'll start with what is Fishburners. So Fishburners is the oldest kind of original startup community. We are a co-working space as well, but mainly a community. That's what we're all about. It is a not-for-profit company. We've been around for 11 years now. Started in Ultimo, 608 Harris Street. Now the building is actually UTS for startups. And then once we, struggled to get more space there, we needed to expand to Vineyard. So there was about 200 desks in the old Ultimo space, and then we actually had to also rent out the terraced house next door just to house all the startups that wanted to be a part of Fishburners. So obviously there was a need to expand. So I think about 4.5 years ago now we moved to Vineyard, which is the Sydney startup hub, alongside some other co-working spaces such as Tankstream Labs and Stone and Chalk. And that building is managed by the government, so Investment New South Wales at the moment. So yeah, now we have I think about 450 desks or so. And yeah, we run a bunch of events. We're very community focused. So yeah, that's kind of the short summary of what Fishburners is. And what I currently do, so as you mentioned, I'm the Director of Growth. So what that entails is I look after the partnerships and also the event space sales and meeting room sales. So it's kind of a sales kind of role. But yeah, I've done, I don't know, about 5 roles through my 5.5 years at Fishburners, starting with the kind of events and programs, and then I was doing the community, and then just the event space sales, and now it's the kind of growth role. So yeah, I've been there for quite a while.
That's really interesting to know, Jane. I would also like to understand from you a bit about how you feel that after your interaction with different founders and CEOs on a daily basis, how do you feel that kind of has changed before pandemic and after pandemic in the way founders look at their business strategies, or how they want to evolve the whole concept of workspaces? Because some of them, they don't want their entire team to work from the office. They want it to be more hybrid, where some members can work from home, some members can work from the office. But this wasn't the case before the pandemic, when we hadn't tested the model. And I'm sure that since you have gone through the entire 5.5 years of Fishburners, you can tell us the difference on how founders kind of see this model of working within their teams.
Yeah, sure. Well, there's obviously been a drastic change to that. So just before COVID, we actually were at 95% capacity. People were coming in every day. That was just the norm. Like, everyone was in the office every day. So it was really busy. But now, the main reason people joining now are, they say, I'm sick of working from home. So we do have a lot of early stage founders at Fishburners, but we do also have teams of up to 15, 20 people as well in there. So I would say it's more common that solo founders are the ones that want to be surrounded by, like-minded people, and, get advice. And, it just gives you more motivation when you're surrounded by other people. But with the teams, I have to say, a lot of the bigger teams actually just come in once a week or something. So the space is definitely feels much emptier than it used to, unfortunately. Which is why we actually just a week ago we reduced our space we took half of one floor off, just so it would feel busier and to bring people more together, because they were kind of scattered around, and had a big space to themselves, which I'm sure they enjoyed. But the whole point of Fishburners is, the community, and kind of almost forcing some people to be together, and making sure that they make connections. So yeah, I would say it definitely is emptier because of those teams that only come in once a week. But what we're seeing more is those new founders, like you mentioned. Obviously, COVID was a big thing. So we had a lot of people join us after the lockdown, that had just started a business because they were at home. They had a lot of time in their hands. Some of them might have been made redundant through COVID. So a lot of businesses definitely started through COVID, because of that, and people just being locked in their homes, nothing else to do. So that was great to see. So yeah, definitely lots of new startups were born in COVID.
I think I will point out the same thing to George as well, because George, for your information, Jane mentors a lot of students. Sitting back in his house in Oakland, he just mentors all the students, and he also runs his own business. So, how has your experience been, George? Because you have been the founder and CEO of a small business, and you're also coaching students. How's been your experience through the pandemic? Because I know you are a person who always wants the face-to-face interactions. Must have been difficult for you to when everything turned virtual.
Yeah, look, I think one of my sayings is, every cloud, you must be able to find the silver lining on every grey cloud. And one of the silver linings of COVID was that it actually showed people that we can work from home, and we can work out of the office, and we can achieve productivity and a whole lot of things like that. However, having said that, one of my more recent talks is about what happened to the coffee machine education. And one of the beautiful things about having people working together in an office is, quite often the younger or the less experienced hear something at the meeting, the boss says something or somebody says something, and then you, Jane, and I are at the next, we go grab a cup of coffee, and one of us will turn to the other and say, well, what was that about? Or what did he mean by that? When you're working in these silos at home, you don't get that. And the idea that people are going to continually ring up everybody and interact, it's not going to happen. Office interaction is one of the greatest things about getting information around. Quite often misinformation, but nevertheless information. Earlier this year, I had to do a presentation on my own business to my business networking group. And I actually pulled the presentation. I decided I would not do that presentation over the internet, because it was a very emotional, it was a very inspiring, and it was a very get people in. And as you know, Sarab, I talk a lot about having energy in the room, and that you can't do that as well over the internet. So I think what we have found is a lot of people have said, you know what, if I cut out my driving time, I can pick up a lot of extra work time. And so they're doing that. We've proven the misnomer that, if you let them work at home, they won't work. Rubbish. In actual fact, it's been shown that in many cases, people are working longer hours at home than they are at the office, because they get involved. So I think there's been good and bad. I would hate to see it go as far as it has. I want to see it come back to people meeting people. For many, many years, and Jane, you would know this, we have busted our gut to get rid of information silos. Once you start having people working at home, you cannot help but end up with another silo. Now, it mightn't be as large as it was before, but nevertheless, there will be silos.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where my next question will be coming to now, because we have discussed about this component of flexibility of working from home and offices. Another question from a startup landscape point of view will be how the startups have kind of evolved over a period of time in Australia with regards to their strategy building. And I know, Jane, you organize different kind of events in Fishburners, including the pitch nights on Friday. And so you listen to a lot of founders pitching in their ideas, pitching in their marketing strategies, or pitching in how they're going to generate revenue for any new ventures that they're coming up with. I've personally met, while I was working at Fishburners, I personally met a lot of founders who have got such an inspiring story. There is so much to learn from everyone's story. What have been some of your top two or three founders or ideas that you have heard in that community coming recently?
Recently, okay, that's an interesting question. I would say, well, two, three stories that threw me a bit off. I would say what I've
Go
noticed is
for one good story and work your way up from there.
yes, sounds good. Thank you, George. Um, but yeah, I would say a lot more businesses have been focusing on social goods. So we just recently ran the Tech for Good Awards because we wanted to kind of encourage more startups kind of doing good and social enterprises. So I would say there's definitely in the past 2 years there's been way more startups that are kind of looking, relooking at the way they do things and becoming social enterprises. And especially with the whole global warming, and there's a lot of really interesting ideas in that space. I would say I can't even point out one to well. I can say one that is our founder at the moment is called Trace, and we actually are kind of part of Trace, which is a platform where they help you reduce your carbon emissions by kind of planting more trees and things like that. So that's a really kind of interesting concept. And I know a lot of businesses have kind of invested in that as well to reduce their carbon emissions. So I think that's a really cool idea. Another one that is not in Fishburners anymore, but because they grew. So usually businesses grow out of Fishburners, they need their own private space eventually. V2 Food, which is a plant-based meat, and they work with CSRO. You might have heard Rebel Whopper at Hungry Jack's. So they're the ones that provide the plant-based meat for that. And now actually, I think they have their burgers and sausages and things on in Woolies as well. So they've been really great. And that's another kind of they do it because obviously meat is a big problem. Growing meat is a big problem for the world with the climate change. So I think that's really great as well. And I can never not mention, of course, Koala. I know that that's not a recent startup, but Koala is one of our biggest kind of success stories. Um, Danny Milham, who was actually on our board as well, but he just left the board, I think, December, because he now started a new startup called Milk Run. I'm sure you've heard of that. They deliver groceries within 10 minutes to your door. So I think that was a great idea, especially through COVID. I mean, people all work from home, and I suppose the society is becoming a bit more lazy and loves the convenience of things. So I think, yeah, Danny, who started Koala and now started Milk Run, he's one of the most inspiring, I suppose, entrepreneurs that really hustles. And he raised $75 million actually last year for the Milk Run. So that's really great. And another one, Car Next Door, they just sold to Uber. So I guess through my time also at Fishburners, you can see that the success happens over time. So those startups, they actually started, in the beginning of Fishburners 11 years ago. And just now they're starting to, they've sold their startups. So 10, 11 years later. So, I guess it's exciting to see finally, all of these startups that have put their hard work into it kind of succeed and exit their startup. So I think now I've said about 4 or 5 of them. I'm sorry. So I said a couple of recent ones and a couple of kind of older ones. So I hope that covers it.
Yeah,
All
absolutely. You
good
have
one.
answered more than what was asked. Absolutely.
Right.
I think I might ask the same question to George as well, because in interchange competitions like interchange and other student driven competitions in New South Wales, we keep on coming up with some new ideas. And I somehow find that ideas on sustainability or working towards the environment kind of are the leading ideas in all these competitions. Also towards smart cities, when people are trying to build smart cities, thinking about different kind of things that we can do to make our infrastructure better every day. Do you think, George, these are the two versions which you also see coming up more within the student community when you lead those competitions?
Actually, it's been interesting, Sarab. The competition that I was just finishing off with over at Joondalup this year, they chose to pick in overcoming discrimination and that for students, and how to help them be more employable in the local community. Last year at Joondalup, they took a tourism question and they changed it to a passion question. And the question was, how do we get more people to stay and visit Joondalup as opposed to pass through? And my team wanted to make it a destination location for people with disabilities. So that was an interesting thing. Yet in Sydney, we're talking one of the teams that were involved with the challenge this year was talking about a sleep apnea program, or a falling asleep at the wheel app, to solve the problem of people falling asleep at the wheel. Last year was about preventing people getting scammed on the internet. So for some reason, the Joondalup teams seem to be more around community and looking to see how they can solve the problem of people that way. And the Sydney ones tend to be more about tech driven and that. So it's interesting. But certainly it's very heartening for me, the number of uni students that are actually looking at things in the sustainability, not wasting food, helping the people that are doing it harder in life than the rest of us. So yeah, it's a good mixture. Good mixture. And as you know,
Yeah.
my campaign at the moment, which we're introducing uni students to a business networking group, is to build better businesses by building better business people, to show people that it doesn't have to be all about profits to be a good and a successful business. And so yeah, it's very pleasing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what I also, when I interact with the students who are now taking part in these kind of competitions, sustainability is somehow at the top of it. And how they can frame their business lean canvas model in the right way somehow defines, what are they coming up with in the 2 or 3 weeks of program that they are framing. But in continuation with
Yeah.
this, I would like to ask Jane, the three pillars that I really find interesting in the startup space are: one is the idea, what kind of idea you have and how different it is from others in the market. Um, and then when you start moving, what's the initial team that you are forming, how committed they are, have you started delegating them the right responsibilities, and of course the strategies that you have for different things. Have you built in the strategies in place for marketing, for sales, for different things that you are doing? How do you rank in terms of idea, team, and strategy for startups to be really successful?
Yeah, good question. I would say definitely strategy would be the top one. So we've seen a lot of startups that started 2 years ago and are still haven't launched. So obviously their strategy is not working. Well, team is obviously crucial, but because we have mostly, solo founders, and yeah, so once they've got to the stage where they can actually have a team, then that's really important. I think team is actually everything, to be honest. But most of our startups are very early stage, so they're mostly looking for co-founders. Actually, that is the main thing that everyone's always looking for, is a tech co-founder. We actually have an event actually now, that we're running with the government, called Find Your Co-founder. So if anyone's interested, then yeah, it's going to be happening, I think, next month. You can check out on our upcoming events on Fishburners. So finding a co-founder is always a big issue for them. But I would say, yes, strategy, just get that right in the beginning, and then the rest should be, go to plan. And I think you mentioned something else: team, strategy, and idea, right? Yeah, so well, the idea is of course also important. I think the most important thing is to test your idea in the beginning. Like, don't start building something that people are not going to be interested in. So build your MVP. It can be a landing page, it can be just a description, of what the product will be. Research, do some market research, do focus groups, check with people if they would be interested in, buying your product or investing in your product. Because a lot of startups I've noticed, through my time at Fishburners, they were just building, building, building for years and years, and then they just went and got a corporate job, because it just didn't work or people weren't interested. So it's definitely important to test it at first, make sure that it's actually worth building it, and then go ahead and do your strategy and start building it if there's interest. I think that's kind of the key.
Yeah, one of the things that I really want to point out here is, while I was in, attending these pitch nights on Friday, every Friday from 5 to 6, I've attended few pitch nights where the founders are pitching to the uh, venture capitalists or angel investors. Pretty interesting to see is that sometimes very simple presentations and very simple ideas are able to get that big investment from the investors. Have you ever noticed such an few examples where you have seen that very simple idea can win that final investment? Because sometimes we try to build in very complicated ideas to get that investment, but we don't have to make it complicated. We can make it simple, and we can still win that money. So I would
Yeah,
love
for
to know
sure.
your thoughts on that.
I have one key example actually. A Fishburners members, he's still a member. Vloggy, is the company. They've got quite a few investments through the pitch night. Actually, interestingly, through COVID, we made these pitch nights hybrid. So we show them online now. We live stream them, and we often get investors overseas watching them too. So Vloggy actually got investment from, I believe it was Singapore, and their idea is actually quite simple. It's kind of making corporate videos easy. So basically, you send a link to, um, you know, a friend or whoever you want to film themselves for, I think, 15 seconds, and then the platform kind of puts a promo video together for you. So it's a really simple idea. To be honest, you think like, oh, why wouldn't you just use, um, what's the Apple app for the iMovie or whatever? Why don't you use that? It is a very simple idea, but I would say that's my main one that I've been really like surprised that really gets so much investor attention. So that's the key one that kind of stands out to me, and such a simple thing, yet so much interest. So yeah.
Yeah, and I remember doing one of the presentations with George itself when we were preparing the presentation for Interchange 2 years back, on a smart city project. And I think George also mentioned about this point as to how you can make your presentation really influencing, and you should have that storytelling component and be very precise in what you are saying so that the audience knows what exactly is your idea and what are you selling. And how are you selling it, isn't it, George?
Yeah, I think um, quite often with startups, the founder is a bit like the inventor of an invention. They want to go through all the detail and the big this and that and that. No one's interested. Not, and I don't mean that in the cruelest of senses, but when we're investing and when you're looking at something from a commercial aspect, what does it do? Who's it going to serve? What's it going to sell for? How big's the market? That's it. Now, you can if you can get that nice and concise, and then you deliver the story of why it's so important and why it's going to be different. The investors, even the ones that are 100% money men, they're still blue sky buyers. A blue sky buyer is buying into something that's not there. So they've got to be able to see what you've got in the future, not in the present. And so if you start getting it all complicated and all of this, they switch out. But if they can see, yeah, look, I got that in 30 seconds, then away you go, then they're gonna think that the average punter or client or customer is going to do the same thing. It happens in inventions. It happens in startups of all sorts. That the co-founder or the inventor, if they keep it nice and tight and just tell us where it's going and what it's going to do, that's what they're interested in.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, George. Thank you so much, Jane. I really appreciate Jane and George, both of you taking your time today for this discussion. I'm sure that we were able to create some sort of valuable insights for anyone in Australia, or also who might be planning to start something of their own outside Australia, because I'm sure we have shared some insights which are quite useful beyond the borders, irrespective of where you are located. Thank you so much, Jane. I hope to see you pretty soon in person at Fishburners.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Saurabh. Thank you, George. Nice to meet you.
Jane. It's been most interesting.
This is an Ultimate Global Podcast. Hello, and welcome to our special weekly podcast on trending international and social affairs. You're listening to Saurabh Kora and George Mavros from Sydney.